Hey everyone, welcome to the FigureItOutcast. I'm Adam Koralik, and as you might have noticed, just off the bat, this is going to be kind of a stranger episode because this is not, you obviously saw there was no intro to this particular episode, and it wasn't edited in the normal way, and audio is probably a little bit different. There is a very specific reason for this. I am not at my home in my little studio able to record the way I usually do. Instead, I'm actually at a hotel in Guam. Of all places. But I still wanted, of course, get the podcast out to all the Patreon backers, and I will probably do a more traditional edit of this when I put it up on the main channel later at the end of the month. But yeah, if you want early access to this podcast or any podcast I do or videos in general, that's as always an option over at the Patreon. But I'm sure a lot of you guys who are already listening to this know that already. So what we're going to do here at this point is we're just going to go into a few subjects. Now this month I have a shorter list of subjects, mostly because a few of them are probably going to just take up more time, and I thought it would just be fine to just kind of limit it to that because I know there's some highlights. But I got a couple of, at least like one weird story in there I just thought was kind of amusing and I wanted to talk about. So, yeah, that's what's going on with me. Just been doing a lot of bouncing around for different events and all sorts of things like that, including, as I'm sure a lot of you know and a lot of you have had questions about, if you follow me on, any of the social things, I got invited to Sega FES by Sega, where we got to reveal Shenmue 1 and 2 being returned. And so I know a lot of people have tons and tons of questions about that, including technical details, release dates, all that kind of stuff, even like how far back the relationship with Sega actually goes. Unfortunately, a lot of that stuff I can't really talk about, and trust me, I'd love to, but I signed an NDA and it would just be a betrayal of trust, not to mention there'd be actual like legal consequences if I was talking about it. But yeah, but I would love to just tell you guys the experience I can tell you and just kind of address it that direction. So obviously when they first reached out to me, that in of itself was unbelievably flattering. And then just talking to them and getting to know more about what was coming was amazing. And ultimately what we did is we came up with a time frame, obviously surrounding Sega FES, and I went out there and we filmed a few different videos. Depending on when you have listened to this, those videos exist. I know some of them already do at the time I record this, but some of them might exist by the time this is public. But we went down to Yokosuka, which is actually where the first game Shenmue takes place, and we went on to Debuita Street, and it was fun. It was myself and Emran Youssef, it was a stand-up comedian in the UK, going around and basically showing them the area. Now, I had actually been to that area, funny enough, only 2 weeks before that, and that had been my second time there. So the great irony was that Sega was supposed to be like, having me there to help show stuff around, and I ended up really showing them around, which was really kind of a unique and interesting thing to have happen. But yeah, it was definitely a surreal, cool experience, and I'm looking forward to the video that we shot there. And ultimately we went to Sega FES itself, and so we got to sit in front, and we knew of course what the announcement was and everything, and we had the trailer. In fact, we had filmed a video specifically for my channel announcing it, including the trailer and all that stuff. We had shot that the day before, and Sega edited that, which was nice of them to do. And yeah, and then ultimately we did I decided on my own to do this guide giveaway contest thing. If you actually went to Yokosuka, right now Sega has these guide maps of the Debuita area that are Shenmue themed. And some stores have even embraced the fact that that's a thing, and they put the guide out in front. But they're just freebies. You can just take them and give them away. So I thought it'd be really cool to mail those out to just contest winners. So when we made the video, I said, what I want to do is mail these to people. And they were like, yeah, sure, sounds great. And so I created the hashtag, it was hashtag Shenmue saved. And we put that, as I just said, put that in the video. And if you put that out there, you can win basically the guide maps. And ultimately, obviously, people won. I shipped them out, and the people who got them seemed pretty happy with them. So I'm glad something cool could come of that. But yeah, ultimately, the whole thing was just a blast. And it's really cool to have a functional relationship with Sega, which is a childhood dream of mine. Obviously, because I grew up on a lot of their content, and I've always been a huge supporter of their stuff. I mean, I'll call them out when they fuck up, and I even joked with them a lot about that in person, which they're cool guys. I mean, they have a great sense of humor, and it was interesting to do so many different things, and just to be able to be like on the other side of the curtain, which is all stuff I really wish I could tell you. But some of that stuff is just like, this doesn't break any NDAs or anything like that. But it was interesting, for example, the night before I left, what we did after the announcement, we went to dinner, and I'm sitting there next to the vice president of Sega of Europe, and I think the vice president of Sega of America, as well as a whole bunch of other major Sega employees, and then just me, the YouTuber, as well as Imran Yusuf. And it was just like fascinating. They're telling me all this stuff, all these great stories from behind the scenes that I unfortunately can't tell you. But it was really cool, and I know already there will be future involvement with them, and I'm looking forward to being able to do more of that. And what I will say about Sega, guys, is that they get it. They heard us, they heard everybody, and they want to really work on that. They really want to work on their image, and I think you guys are going to be pretty happy with a lot of their forthcoming decisions. A lot of forthcoming things from them, I think, are going to be really awesome. No, there's never going to be a new Sega console or anything like that. I've been saying that for years, but the Sega that we all loved, the one that we get super nostalgic for, that fire that made that burn, that atomic flame, if you will, is not out. It almost was, but it's still there, and it's starting to grow. And I think it's going to start coming back in ways that will be really legitimately exciting to a lot of us, and I'm very, very excited for the future of it. And I will say, while there's so much I would love to tell you about all the Shenmue-related content, I will say, in every regard, you should really support this re-release, because it can lead to a lot of other things. This is, in a lot of ways, a test. That much I can say. And so far, we are passing that test. I've seen a ton of people pre-ordering it, as sales seem pretty fucking good. I mean, it was ranking #1 on Amazon and various, like, I know Amazon France, it was definitely #1 in video game sales. And then a few different Amazons, it was either like right up there, or in some others, it actually, I think on Amazon US, it got to #1 as well. Typically, it's the PS4 version, not so much the Xbox One version, but there is an Xbox One version, which you can support, as well as the digital Steam key version, although I don't know if pre-orders exist for that, or they probably do. But my point is, keep supporting that. Make that successful, because I can't say why, I can't say all these other things that they were telling me about, but if this is successful, a lot of other bigger, better, greater things can come to be. So I personally am going to support the living shit out of it, and I hope that you all do too. It's just so cool, and I'm gonna unfortunately have to stop talking about this point, because I'm getting into dangerous territory where I might be saying too much. So as I'm allowed to, I will continue to give you guys updates about Shenmue. I mean, at this point, I've only been able to say like 10% of the stuff I was made privy to. And when I talk to them, they'll tell me like this and that, and then I say like, which of that can I talk about, stuff like that. But whenever a new batch of information is allowed to be made public, trust me, you're going to get it through either me or Sega directly. You can check that out on Twitter or whatever, or right here. I will usually post a video if I'm able to. But yeah, look forward to continued updates on that. And it's really cool that, I mean, set aside that this is actually coming from me. It is really cool, in my opinion, that Sega is directly working with avid fans of theirs to help communicate to other fans. Like, set aside, again, that it's actually me. Like, if this was any other YouTubers that I know that they follow, like, to those, if you are watching, I know that they follow Max, a Dreamcast guy. I know they like him a lot. They like Happy Console Gamer. They really like him. RGT85 Sean. They really like him a lot. There's quite a few out there that they watch pretty regularly, and I feel very honored that they kind of picked me for that representation. But if it wasn't me, if it was any of them or anybody else, I would be like, holy shit, that's awesome that Sega's working directly with these fans, these content creators, to get basically a direct line, and to just kind of figure out a way to improve their image and, you know, appease fans and give them what they want. But what I will also say is, it can feel like sometimes like you're shouting into an empty room. Like for all those years we were thrown out there, like save Shenmue, and it's felt like they were just throwing that stuff in the garbage. They heard you, and even though it always felt like this isn't going anywhere, trust me, it did. And it can eventually lead to success, as we saw in this case. So I will also say with things like, you know, I mean, I can't talk specifics, but certain games that I know a lot of people are requesting, like I know people are saying like, where's Jet Set Radio Future? You know, like where is all that stuff? They're not unaware. That doesn't mean it can or will happen, but with enough fan support of anything, that door is open. And what I will say is if Shenmue 1 and 2's re-release is successful, that door is more open than it has ever been. So I can't stress enough how successful you should try to make that release. And I wish it well for not only myself, but all gamers, because really this can be awesome for all of us to just kind of bring Sega back hard in a big, bad, awesome way. So there you go. That's kind of a lot on that, and I'd love to tell you so many more details, but I really, really can't. So you'll just have to trust me on that one for now. But yeah, so that was the kind of what I can say of the Shenmue / Sega FES experience. It was probably a once-in-a-lifetime great thing. Like, again, I'm going to be working with them more on stuff, but that was really just really something. Really something. And I'm looking forward to more involvement with them in the future. But moving on here, this is a quirky subject that is Sega related, but strange. This requires a bit of an explanation. Basically, what happened here in a nutshell is sales reports every month come out for video games. So like when a store, like a GameStop, a Best Buy, or whatever, like a major retailer, not a used store, every time they sell games, they have to scan the little barcode. The system knows what the game is. It has a price, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, it reports that it's sold a copy. That this is the most basic possible way to track how many games are being sold physically. There was an anomaly in March of 2018. Specifically, one store somewhere in the United States sold a brand new copy of Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for the Game Gear. Now, at first, you might read that and think, okay, whatever. I mean, so someone had an old sealed copy and a disc replay or a Goodwill, whatever, who cares? No. This is a major retailer where it's still considered brand new and the funding goes to the original publisher and owner, which in this case would actually be Sega. Sega actually made money off of a Game Gear game being sold last month. Well, 2 months ago at this point in time, which is bizarre. So no one seems to know exactly what store bought, which store sold it, where it was sold, or who bought it. All the system knows is that a copy was sold. And that's kind of fascinating. The likely candidate is Toys R Us for two reasons. Toys R Us held on to its Game Gear and Genesis inventory infinitely longer than anybody else did. I mean, that stuff was sitting there for years. I remember going well into 2005. They still had Game Gear shit on the wall, and it was like, what are you doing? So it's very probable it was them for that reason, but the other reason is the liquidation sale that's happening at Toys R Us in North America, or at least the US specifically. They're getting rid of everything. So when you unload enough stuff, it's entirely possible some copy of the game was sitting behind a counter, like it had fallen between the, like they have game display cases and they move the case and there's this copy of Sonic 2 behind it or something. Like, it's entirely possible that's exactly what happened. That would be my guess. And it's just kind of funny that it could be sold. I mean, when it was essentially discontinued and gotten rid of in 1992. I mean, the Clinton's first term, you know what I mean? Like, that was a while ago. So I just find that story fascinating. I find little oddball things like that interesting. So very cool. And yeah, that's about all I have to say on that. I just think it's fascinating. Hopefully whoever buys it somehow comes forward with that. I'd be very curious what condition it was actually in, or if it was like dusty as hell, or what the deal was. But still, very cool. Moving on to our next subject here. So E3 is right around the corner. Depending on the time when you listen to this, it's either basically a month away or it's like a week away. Now I've just gotten confirmation I will actually be at E3. Mostly wandering the show floor, probably going to a few of the random parties and stuff like that. The only conference I know that I'm going to is I'm going to the Bethesda conference, I'm going to the Ubisoft conference, and I'm pretty sure I'm getting to the Square Enix conference. That one I'm still waiting on total confirmation of. Unfortunately, I want to get into the Xbox and PlayStation conference, but I did not have such luck there. And I believe Nintendo's conference is at the exact same time as Square Enix, though I would never get into a Nintendo thing anyway, like they would never bring me. And Sega is going to have a thing, but it's not as big of a conference per se. I think it's just a section of something, so I don't think I can get in through that, which is unfortunate, but that would have been cool. But anyway. So, I'm looking forward to E3 out in LA. But as far as, like, what do I think might happen? I went there last year, and I remember Ubisoft really stole the show. Like, they had the best conference with the most surprises. Miyamoto just randomly showed up. Because of them, I was, like, 5 feet away from Miyamoto at one point, which was great. I remember Sony's conference being just filler, like they didn't have anything exciting. It was a continuation of the previous one with kind of the hype for the next year, where they were just kind of showing game trailers, which is sad because, like, you know, it's sad when somebody has such an obviously bad conference compared to everyone else, which is, I know it sounds biased, but like only a couple years earlier, they had by far the best one, you know, the Shenmue 3 drop and Final Fantasy remake and all that shit. Like it's just, sometimes it's your year and sometimes it's not. Microsoft last year had a very mediocre one at best, but they did have that original Xbox backwards compatibility announcement, which to me stole the show. Like that was the single greatest announcement of anything at E3 last year, which is obviously the original Xbox backwards compatibility. As cool as it is, it's not a very big program. I love it. You know, I always tweet about it and I show photos. I even make videos about it. But I can tell that it's not that popular of a program because I'm almost the only guy who makes videos about it. Like when it got announced, I did a big video about it. When they finally set a date for it, which with, you know, what games would be available, I made a video about it. When they announced this wave of newest ones that just happened like 2 months ago, I made a video about it. And I started looking up like other people talking about it, and it's like you'd get GameSpot's video, you'd get Microsoft's actual video, and then you'd get my videos. And I tried that on different browsers with different accounts and even in like private mode, and my videos would always come up because it's just not that popular of a feature, as neat as it is to maybe to a lot of people like us, because we're like retro gamers, a lot of us. So to us, it's neat. But in general, the mass audience is like, whatever. Maybe like a couple of those games they'll play for nostalgic reasons, but that's about it. But that said, I'm not complaining. I love the program. I want them to continue to support it and expand it. I think it's fantastic. But I can see that it's probably not doing them much other than marketing, which is probably why they're not being as big about it as they are the 360 compatibility, which incidentally doesn't really get them much either. Statistics show that most people don't really play for very long the 360 titles on Xbox One, but it's a great marketing thing for them to be able to say like, hey, all your Xboxes in one roof type of deal, or at least to suggest that possibility. So what I'm going back to E3 though, because granted we went off on a tangent there. When it comes to E3 this year, I don't know who. I want to say that I think that something crazy's got to happen. I think that a lot of the game developers will probably have relatively standard shows. I think, you know, Square Enix, maybe they'll finally show us like more of that Final Fantasy remake, maybe. Bethesda might announce that Skyrim is coming to the Neo Geo. No, I'm just kidding about that. But I think that you'll see a lot of Switch ports coming out of third-party developers. I wouldn't be surprised if Bethesda is just like, all right, we're throwing out a couple extra games onto the Switch that are older. Like they did that with Doom and Skyrim. I wouldn't be surprised if you see a Fallout get announced for the Switch. With Ubisoft, I could see them maybe doing something similar. Maybe something like Assassin's Creed Rogue might come out to the Switch. But those are like lesser surprises. I think maybe with Ubisoft, you might see an expansion of Beyond Good and Evil 2. They might show more of that. They might announce something like Watch Dogs 3 or the next... I know they already announced The Division 2, so I'm betting they'll show more of that. That's kind of what I'm feeling from them, is my guess. Maybe a Mario Rabbids 2, but I think it's a little early for that. So I wouldn't bank on that one. And I think it's too early for another Assassin's Creed. It's definitely too early for another Far Cry. Unless they do kind of what they did with Far Cry Primal, where they basically just kind of reskin Far Cry 4. But my guess is they won't be doing that. Maybe they'll do something like Far Cry 3 for Switch, although I kind of doubt it because that seems a little dated. Because it is, but it's a little more obvious when it's a numerical game. So I don't know if I would really bet on it. Like Assassin's Creed Rogue, you could probably get away with because it's like a separate entity game and it's just a name, like a side game. Whereas if you call it Far Cry 3 and it's coming to Switch, it's like, well, why isn't Far Cry 4, Primal, and 5? Well, for technical reasons, that's why it's not going there. But Far Cry 3 could. But my guess is they won't do that. So going to the heavy hitters, Nintendo... well, obviously, I know I keep focusing on the Switch, but I guess that's kind of what I'm expecting is, in a lot of ways, is a lot of stuff for the Switch since Switch is blown up. I think that Nintendo obviously is going to put out more Switch content. I wouldn't be surprised if you see more Wii U cannibalization. I would not be surprised if you see specifically things like Super Mario World 3D or Super Mario 3D World, whatever the fuck it was, coming to Switch. A few of the other heavy hitters that I suddenly can't remember, because I mean I know the Hyrule Warriors is on it's actually out in Japan, probably be out right around the corner. Oh, it's definitely gonna be out by the time I'm doing this video. But yeah, there's gonna be a whole bunch of, I'm guessing, a lot of Wii U ports, but probably a couple of new titles announced, as well as just some updates on other ones. Like maybe there'll be an update to Metroid Prime 4. Though last year was literally a trailer that anyone could have made because at that time there was no development team in place. It was just to appease stockholders. And it wouldn't surprise me if there isn't much progress there. But if there is, that's great, and I hope to see it. What else? I don't think you'll get a straight-up new Mario game announced. I think it's too early for that. Same with Zelda. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they announced some new Zelda DLC or something like that. I could see a new Kirby game get announced. That one would actually make sense to me. Granted, there was one that just came out, but I could still see it. Maybe we'll see a lot of updates to Smash Brothers. I know that was announced. Probably going to see some sort of big update there. Donkey Kong Country, I don't think so. I'm just thinking about their classic IPs. I think this year is basically that for them. That's just, obviously I'm just guessing. Obviously every single bit of this could be wrong. I'm just pulling this out of my ass as guesses, like what I think will happen, but we'll see. Sony, I'm sure, will show us a lot more updates to various titles of theirs that are right around the corner. Probably a few quirky surprises. I'm hopeful because I really don't want them to repeat what they did last year. I would not be surprised if we see a Shenmue 3 update trailer. I would not be surprised if we see that shit at the PlayStation conference. I do not have any insight into that. I would like to make that very clear. Shenmue 1 and 2 is Sega's entity. Shenmue 3 is EaseNet's entity. They are not connected in that regard. So while I have these, ties, if you will, to Sega for Shenmue 1 and 2 and all that, I have no connection to the EaseNet team. So I don't have any insights into how Shenmue 3 is going, to be honest with you. But I wouldn't be surprised if they show up and drop some sort of new trailer there. We'll see, obviously. And I would hope... This is not something I think will happen, but I wish it would. I would really love it if Sony basically embraced the same concept Microsoft is doing with backwards compatibility. I get that they can't do PS3 support. It's too complicated. It's too different from the PS4. Even the PS4 Pro would realistically not be able to do that. It would be very nice to see them, however, basically, because they already have a program in place for PS1 and PS2 emulation, more so they focus on PS2, that allows you to basically download titles, rebuy them digitally. I would love it if they essentially dropped that, basically that paywall, and your original PS2 discs would work in the same fashion. That would be a nice surprise, but the truth is they don't need to do that. Microsoft is not a concern for them. That's just the reality of it. Microsoft is a non-entity threat to Sony this generation. Having just come back from, at the time I record this, I was in Japan not a week ago, and while the Xbox has never been super successful there, it at least kind of had a fighting chance for a little bit. The Xbox One, though, is the Xbox done over there. Like, at this point, I mean, I was there, God, I've been there, this is so weird to think about. I've been to Japan 5 times in the last calendar year. First time I was there, Xbox sections were pretty big. Second time I was there, they were smaller, but they were fine. Third time, even smaller. Fourth, I didn't see it because I wasn't really able to. And the fifth time, this time, it's been a struggle to find anything Xbox One related at all. They're pretty much completely gone. In fact, if you go back and watch the Shenmue 1 and 2 release trailer that debuted at Sega FES, the one you see at Sega FES was actually the Japanese trailer, which only said PS4 on the bottom. Whereas the trailer that dropped on my channel at the same time was the, I believe it was the European trailer specifically, although I don't think it was the American one, I think it was the European one. But it says at the end it's coming to PS4, Xbox One, and PC. The reality is PC and Xbox One are completely irrelevant platforms in Japan, so they didn't want to even acknowledge that over there. And the reason that I'm pointing that out is because Sony has basically, they've won, but over the Microsoft crowd. Like, they've won in Japan handedly. They've pretty much won in North America and Europe. They are focused more on the Switch as their competition. In a healthy way, because Nintendo and Sony typically get along better. So what I am suggesting to you is that Sony might do something to basically appeal to Switch customers. Now, I don't know what that is. Sony has not had a whole lot of success in the handheld realm the way Nintendo has. I mean, yes, the PSP sold fine. Vita really did not. And they're not going to just come up with another dedicated handheld. But I feel like they're going to try to do something to appeal to basically the Switch crowd. Like, whatever their team of analysts believe is the reason for the success of the Switch, I think that they are going to try and replicate that in some fashion for themselves. Now, what that is, again, is $1 million question. But I get the feeling that that's the case. It could be as blatantly obvious like PS Move was with, you know, Wiimote clones, or it could just be like, we're going to make games that are very, very similar to the ones that are over there. Like, I don't know exactly what it is. I also think that Sony will try a little bit harder with PSVR, which I'm surprised the PSVR is still working for them, and good for them. But I do think that they might expand that program a little bit to help themselves stand out. But yeah, other than that, I don't have any obvious things. Like, I would love to be able to say, oh, they're going to drop a trailer for the new Twisted Metal or something like that, which would be great. There is no Twisted Metal announced. I'd love to see a new one. If there was a time to do it, it would be about now, because I believe it's David Jaffe, the guy who is responsible for the God of War series, is also the guy responsible for the Twisted Metal franchise. And since they just wrapped up God of War, in theory, this would be the next project if he wanted to do it. So right now would be the time to drop some sort of very, very early teaser that just says, like, the game is coming. So that would be my one crazy game prediction, is a new Twisted Metal game. Hopefully infinitely better than the terrible 2012 PS3 game, which really was a huge fucking disappointment. So that's my thoughts on that. As for Microsoft, I really hope they do an infinitely better job of nailing down some worthwhile exclusive content. And when I say that, I mean, I say that accepting they will never have true exclusive content. Their games, it's part of their policy that their games will always have PC releases. That's fine. whatever. I got no issue with that, really. The only issue I have with it is the cannibalistic nature of doing that. It's, you know, bad for your brand, but whatever, that's a separate argument. As a console gamer who owns an Xbox One, I would like to have more content on it that made it in of itself exciting and not just stuff that's also available everywhere else. But to really elaborate on that, I'd have to go into the psychology of wanting exclusive content, but that doesn't really matter right now. The point is, I hope that Microsoft brings new titles to the table that are interesting. Sea of Thieves was kind of honestly like a big disappointment. Which reminds me, going back to the Ubisoft conference, I think they'll show way more of Skull and Bones. I got to play that last year in like a behind the curtain type of environment. It was really, really fun, and it was kind of like what I think Sea of Thieves would have been done correctly, at least the version I played. It's been a year extra of development, so I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of updates. But anyway, I just thought of that on the spot, so I want to go back to it. But anyway, back to Microsoft. I don't know if I can throw out any like obvious game title predictions. One I would really, really like to see. I'm going to throw this out as the absolute craziest thing. Is I would really like it if Microsoft announced a new Conquer game. My evidence to support this possibility, other than just, you know, desire, is of course when they dropped the tail, I just gave it away. When they dropped the trailer for Super Lucky Tail last year, not just me, but a ton of people thought that was a new Conker's game and then felt kind of like, what the fuck? They've also made, of course, they brought Conker's Bad Fur Day into the Rare Replay collection, which really added the value of that. And Conquer Live and Reloaded was one of the cherry-picked titles that Microsoft chose to make backwards compatible with the Xbox One. So there is a lot of evidence to suggest the possibility that they're trying to reinvigorate that brand by just starting to warm people back up to it. So it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it would and it wouldn't if they announced a new Conquer game. But I think that would be a good kind of lean into a bigger announcement, which would be an interesting cooperation. This is completely out of left field and probably 100% wrong. But I like the idea that you could see some greater cooperation between Microsoft and Nintendo. Those two do not have the negative history that other companies that do. Those two have always just kind of been like competitors technically. They've never really gone head to head in any real, I mean, like, you know, except for debatably GameCube and Xbox, the OG version, they've never really had to do that. Like, because Nintendo's always been off doing its own thing, or they've been doing handhelds, which Microsoft has never even attempted. So there is no like sourness in that relationship. So they also have some unfinished business together, like specifically the GoldenEye revival. For those who don't know, of course, GoldenEye, one of the N64's most infamous and frankly best games. The reason you have never seen that game re-released in things like Rare Replay or the HD versions or complete remakes, there's been things that have used the title of GoldenEye but have failed, like GoldenEye Rogue Agent for the Xbox, GameCube, PS2, and then there was the GoldenEye Wii with Daniel Craig's version of James Bond. The reason you have never seen the full-on reproduction of that game is that was a movie license game, and the ownership of it is split up amongst 3 different groups, which is Rare themselves owns a third of it, which means Microsoft owns a third of it. Nintendo owns a third of it, and the other one that everybody forgets about is EA. They own the James Bond game license. So you have 3 different companies that would have to be involved with this. Now, from what I understand, the remake for the 360 was actually finished. It was completely done because there was a deal cut, but last minute, I believe it was Nintendo pulled out of it. So as a result, that version has never seen the light of day. Now, what if, in addition to getting Conquer, just because you're trying to boost this concept of working with Nintendo, you also throw out things like, GoldenEye is coming back and we're doing this. And that would allow for mutual cooperation. So For example, you could get a game. Microsoft and Nintendo could sit in a room together and be like, look, Sony's doing too well with the PlayStation 4. You and I are in kind of different markets, but we kind of want the same thing. What if we do this GoldenEye game? Maybe we do this Conquer game. We do these things, and we release them on both. So there's the Switch version. There's an Xbox One version, but there is no PS4 version. I would predict the possibility of stuff like that, and don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I do not think for a second you're going to start seeing Mario games showing up on the Xbox brand. I'm not saying that, and you're not going to see Halo on the Switch. But it wouldn't surprise me if you start seeing a couple of things, a couple of games where these two companies kind of work together from behind the scenes a little bit to basically help each other, because they're not really direct competitors. It's like they are competitors, but not really the same market. So it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it would and it wouldn't if you saw something crazy like that. And I think that would be like the really big, awesome Microsoft reveal. But like beyond that, you know, maybe we'll see a trailer for Halo 6 or something, Gears of War, 5? So maybe stuff like that. One thing I'd really love to see is an announcement for a physical edition of Cuphead, you know, with a whole bunch of stuff, something like that. But beyond that, I don't really have any major expectations of them. So I guess we'll see. Yeah, those are basically my E3 predictions, and I realize that took longer than I expected, but let's see how right I was when this comes out. When this comes out now, I mean, we'll still have over a month, but when this comes out publicly, it'll still be like 2 weeks away. So we will probably talk about E3 one more time before E3 itself actually happens. But anyway, moving on, we have a round of shout-outs here. Now, every one of these people on this list is a Patreon backer, which they donate per month and they get a shout-out. I'm going to do a rapid fire here. If anytime you want to donate to, just help support the channel and support the podcast, or, get a shout-out like they got, or hell, you can even be on this podcast if you really want to. Feel free anytime at patreon.com/Adam Koralik. But yeah, round of shout-outs time. We've got Justin Webb, Jonas Pachanka, Corey Marsh, Rob Janos, Trey Wagner, and Tim Inman. So thank you guys. You guys are all awesome. I really do sincerely appreciate you guys. So I'm going to say your names one more time. Justin Webb, Jonas Pachanka, Corey Marsh, Rob Janos, Trey Wagner, and Tim Inman. Thank you very much, guys. Moving on to our next subjects here. We got three left, and they're all movie related. The first one is pure speculation because at the time I record this movie is not out. The second one is going to be like 100% spoilers territory, but we'll get to it when we get to it. I will warn you, I promise. And then the third one is going to be back to speculation. If you want to jump around, feel free to, there's going to be time code in the description of the video. Feel free to click on that and move around to whatever subjects you want. You can always do that. I always set that up in my podcast. Anyway, so the first of those three, we're going to talk a little bit about Solo, the Star Wars story. Now, okay, so Star Wars, beloved franchise. I love it a lot, although it has had its mistakes. Solo is the remnant of a different era of Disney's Star Wars empire. I didn't really mean the empire pun, but I guess it's there. So when Disney got a hold of the Star Wars franchise, they created this model whereby they would have at least one film in the can, or one project as they referred to it, because that could expand to TV shows, every year for 40 years. The first on that list was the completion of what they had of Star Wars Clone Wars, which is why that just kind of ended and it came out. The next up was Star Wars Rebels, and then it started being the movies coming out basically in sequence. Basically creating time to produce those films. Because they essentially believed they had an infinite bank, a supply of money in this franchise that no matter what you release, it will always make money. Because they're like, well, the prequels sucked, but still they made a shit ton of money. It doesn't matter. It's got Star Wars on it, it sells. Like, that's boardroom thinking. So they put out Force Awakens, and of course that actually was massively financially successful. It was the first Star Wars film, other than Clone Wars, that had come out since 2005. And in a lot of ways, it was, to a lot of people's nostalgia, it was the first real Star Wars movie to come out since Return of the Jedi, because a lot of people always felt like, the prequels didn't feel real in a sense. And they capitalized on that. And as a result, it was a $2 billion grossing film. So in Disney's mindset, it was going to be every time you put out a Star Wars movie, it grosses $1 billion. Now Rogue One came around and it did well. It didn't, I believe it did actually cross the $1 billion mark barely worldwide. Then Last Jedi did it, but Last Jedi really slowed down. That was not like a random anthology film. Like that was the mainstay franchise, and it didn't do as well for a whole host of reasons we won't go into. But Solo was the remnant of this concept of doing a movie every single year, and it doesn't really matter what we do, because Solo is a movie nobody asked for. I mean, I love Star Wars, dude, and no part of me has ever wanted to see a Han Solo movie, especially in prequel form. Like, it was not a necessary thing. There's only a handful of characters where I would actually find that their individual stories to be interesting, most notably the Obi-Wan movie. You cast Ewan McGregor in an Obi-Wan movie that takes place in between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, I'm there. That sounds like a movie. Because that dude has the weight of the universe on his shoulders. Like, in a sense, it's all his fault. That's a movie. Solo is not a movie because... first of all, setting aside how terrible the trailers look, which we'll get to that, if you look at it objectively, when A New Hope begins, Harrison Ford's portrayal of Han Solo is this, obviously a rogue, dashing, kind of scummy criminal-like person. And over the course of that trilogy, he becomes a better human being. He learns all those lessons. He goes through the kind of a movie arc, right? And he kind of almost completes that by Empire, which is why he doesn't have as much to do in Return of the Jedi. Which means that this movie has to end with him still being an asshole who has learned nothing. So that's already a huge problem off the bat. And I just feel like this movie is going to be nothing but a series of quotes about, like, you know, we're going to see the Kessel Run done in 12 parsecs, you know, that kind of thing. We're just going to... everything about it just kind of bothers me. In addition to the performance of the lead actor... who, if you've been following a lot of the behind the scenes of this movie, it has been a production disaster. When it was originally greenlit, it was largely pushed by Lawrence Kasdan. Lawrence Kasdan and George Lucas had this idea for a Han Solo movie going all the way back to Empire Strikes Back. But it never really saw the light of day. When, you know, they were really around the time when they were doing Return of the Jedi, George Lucas kind of had a change of heart, which is why certain things about Return of the Jedi are different than originally conceived. Han Solo lives, he wasn't originally supposed to. Princess Leia gets her, like, happy ending instead of originally she was supposed to, like, inherit the Empire. Like, it was a lot of big differences. But they went for the happy, you know, Ewoks dancing around ending because George was kind of done making movies and he wanted to go be a father. So that project was shelved. Now that George is kind of out of the way, Lawrence Kasdan, I think, had good intentions to kind of revisit that idea, but it was, frankly, it had no reason to exist anymore. And I just don't see the point of it. And if you follow a lot of it now, Lawrence Kasdan supposedly put his son's name all over the project in an effort to give his son more of a career push. And when you follow the stories about Kathleen Kennedy, who is the head of Lucasfilm, you get the sense that while she's knowledgeable in a lot of things, I mean, she's a producer of some of your favorite films. She is very good at one particular type of job, but being the head of Lucasfilm, I do not think was one of them. But she was an attachment of the sale. A condition of the sale of Lucasfilm to Disney was that she stays in that job. And my point there is that I think she just kind of greenlit projects because she didn't know what to greenlight. She was like, oh, well, Lawrence Kasdan wrote Empire and he wants to make this, greenlight it. Disney is putting me under pressure to release a movie every single year, which explains why Last Jedi, when, you know, Rian Johnson came to her with, like, this zany, like, let's subvert expectations idea, she went, yeah, sure, okay, you seem to be passionate about it, that sounds good. You know, not really thinking it all through. I know the same thing happened with John Knoll when he went to her about Rogue One. He's like, I have this idea about, you know, the Death Star plans. The guy is, like, the special effects artist. He creates Photoshop, goes to her and says, like, I want to, you know, make a Star Wars movie. Sure, great, I need ideas. Or when Rian Johnson said, oh, I'd love to make more. And she's like, how about a whole trilogy? Like, she just needs to get these movies made. She's under incredible pressure from Disney. And that's what I mean when I say Solo is a remnant of that. Because it's... I think that after this movie inevitably tanks, there's going to be a paradigm shift in the way Disney handles it. I think they're going to recognize that Star Wars sorely needs a break. And it'll get basically a 1.5 year break before Episode 9 comes out. Hopefully that does it, but they might take a bigger break after that. We will obviously see. But going back to Solo's behind-the-scenes crap that annoys me, first of all, when that movie started out, they hired the 2 directors of the Lego movie, Lord and Miller. It's their last names. I forget their first names. But they have a very improvisational style where they would do as much as 40 takes. And they apparently, the guy they cast for Han Solo, they claim they saw over 3,000 people. He was the first one to come in, and he got the role, which to a lot of people suggests that they didn't really do that big of a behind-the-scenes thing, that he just got lucky because he was the first person to walk in the door, and essentially they remembered him first on that basis and went, yeah, all right, sure, he did it, fine. That's kind of the perception, because when you actually watch the trailers, you'll notice he never speaks. He says very, very little. A lot of the behind-the-scenes reporting suggests the guy is a terrible actor. He really couldn't grasp the character. He just kind of looks like a young Harrison Ford, and only kind of at best. And so they actually had to have an on-site acting coach, and it got to a point where they just had the acting coach say it one way, and this dude would just mimic it as best he could, which is like, how could you cast that? So what would make a lot of sense is there was a point where the movie was largely completed, and they considered it unwatchable, at least at Lucasfilm and Disney. So they basically fired Lord and Miller and brought in Ron Howard, and he ended up reshooting something like 95% of the film. However, it would appear that the reason they never recast at that point is because they didn't think Ron Howard was going to end up reshooting that much of the film, that he was probably going to just do some pickup scenes or whatever. Because otherwise there was no reason to not recast the film at that point. Now, there's been a lot of push for this other actor. There's a picture of this young actor next to Harrison Ford who looks hauntingly like him, who I believe actually played him, correct me if I'm wrong, of course, in the new Blade Runner. There's like a young Harrison Ford type of character or scene. And they wanted to cast the same guy because they're like, he looks like him, he sounds like him, clearly a better actor. Why didn't they pick that guy? I know there was some big movement to push him into this. So everything about Solo to me screams disaster, because even if you take away these production issues, including a terrible performance from this actor, which if all reports are true, it would indicate is going to be bad. Even if you take away all that shit, and this was like a perfect film, did anybody really want a Star Wars Solo film? I really never did, and I love Star Wars, but at no point ever did I say, I need a movie just about that character. I really never did. And that doesn't mean it was an impossible thing to accomplish. It just means it really probably shouldn't have been attempted, at least this early on. If you were going to do a standalone movie, like I said, I think that Obi-Wan would have been the perfect candidate. But that's not the direction they went. So obviously we'll see. I would love to be wrong about this, because I don't want this to suck. It doesn't benefit me if it sucks. I don't want it to be terrible. I want it to be good. I want to go in, I want to enjoy it and enjoy Star Wars. I just can't accept that that's going to happen until my eyes and my ears tell me otherwise in the theater. So we'll see. But yeah, I got to say, not looking forward to it. But hey, if you guys are, let me know. So moving on, the next film was the big one, Avengers Infinity War. Now, this is going to be very, very, very spoiler intensive. So if you haven't seen the movie, probably this is where you should tune out, to be honest, because the subject after this is going to be about Ant-Man. And while that movie isn't out yet, I will probably reference Infinity War a lot. So thank you. This is as far as you went. So let's talk about Avengers Infinity War. Probably the biggest movie ever. This is a film that has been essentially in development for a decade. It's been hinted at really ever since the first Iron Man really started to build up this universe. And I gotta say, I am not disappointed. I really, really enjoyed this film, as I'm sure a lot of people have, because it is really a film that should not have worked, because it has way too many characters. It has a very strange structure. It ends in a very bleak sense, in the opposite of most film structure, and yet it's unbelievably satisfying. it's still a very, very entertaining and enjoyable movie. It has many aspects to it, which I really, really like, and a lot of aspects that, at best, I thought were strange. And of course, there's obvious ones that you just kind of have to say you have to ignore, because otherwise you don't have a movie. Like, why didn't Thanos, once he had all that power, just double the universe's resources or whatever? You don't have a movie. It's like you can't do that. But it's interesting to make such a big villain like that relatable in a sense, meaning like. And Marvel's gotten better at that, especially with this and Black Panther. Rather than having like Thor the Dark World's like big bad elf monster who just wants to be a big bad monster thing, you have, you know, these later villains you kind of empathize with. Like, you don't necessarily agree with their plan, but you see what they're trying to do. And that makes them, frankly, not only better characters, but it actually makes them scarier, which is good for a villain. So like, you know, you sit there and you empathize with Thanos, which is fucked up. You're empathizing with this CGI purple monster man. And you're thinking, like, what he wants to do is horrific. He wants to end half of the life in the universe, but you understand why. It actually, to an extent, makes sense. And it's a weird feeling to kind of see that. And I liked that because it made me engrossed in both sides' objectives. Like, at the end of the day, sure, you want the Avengers to stop him because that's what they're supposed to do. So when they don't, it's even fucking weirder because you were at one point were kind of rooting for the villain, and then he actually does win. So there's your big spoiler. But yeah, that movie, I felt like it really, really clicked in a lot of great ways. I know a lot of people pin if you want to say, the failure of the film on Star-Lord, Peter Quill, when they have that scene when they're on Titan and the Avengers that are there have successfully kind of stopped Thanos, and they're ripping the Infinity Gauntlet off of his hand, and they're about to get it. And then he just can't help himself. He just gets too emotional and he basically screws it up. Peter Quill, I mean. Because if he hadn't done that, Spider-Man would have successfully got the thing off of his hand and you would have stopped everything right there. Which is not a flaw, but I know a lot of people are kind of casting blame on him. It was cool to see Thor kind of be a lot more interesting in that film than he has been. I mean, he was really good in Thor Ragnarok, but it's good to see him kind of get bigger and more badass. I liked seeing a lot of these characters share screen time that you really wouldn't have expected, like Thor and Rocket Raccoon. I really loved that Peter Dinklage played a giant. I know technically he was a dwarf, but that's a different race or whatever. But just that was fucking casting genius. I loved that. I love the random Arrested Development cameo. This one, I saw this movie with my girlfriend in the theater, and at the very end, we're waiting for the credits scene, and it said something about, like, Arrested Development character courtesy of, like, ABC or Fox or whatever, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, Arrested Development character? And I didn't know exactly what that meant, so I actually did a little looking into it, and it turns out, if you watch the scene where Thanos goes to... when the Guardians of the Galaxy go to get the red Infinity Stone and they get there and Thanos is basically beating up the Collector, or what you think that's what he's doing, there is a whole room of aliens there, like there has been and all the time. One of them is actually Tobias Funke, played by David Cross. And he's just sitting there in his, like, a hammock, like in his full attire. So I guess technically the Arrested Development universe, if you want to call it that, is part of the MCU. It's just a joke, but like it's funny to think that that's a thing. I think that's hilarious. So that was really interesting. What else can I say? I will say that the Hulk thing. So the opening scene of that film really accomplished a lot without telling you a damn word, and I thought that was genius. So what happened at the end of Thor Ragnarok is, all our main characters from Thor Ragnarok are on the ship and everything, and they're like, we're gonna go somewhere. I think they were just going to Earth, and then this big ship gets in their way, and that's where the movie ends. So this movie takes place right after that, which is basically that was Thanos' ship, and he's killed like everybody on board of that ship from Thor Ragnarok. So at that point, the only real survivors are Thor and Loki and Bruce Banner. And so they do three things right away. One, they basically show the absolute uselessness of Thor at that point, while also kind of setting him up as the guy who will be later responsible for at least wounding, if you will, Thanos. They set that up very nicely. They kill Loki, and you're just like, okay, that says a lot, because A, you were just starting to like Loki, and now you're like, oh shit, they just killed this guy who I liked, which told you this is how much more powerful Thanos is, because, I mean, Loki was the primary villain in the first Avengers, and here Thanos just fucking snapped his neck. It was nothing. So he does that, while also telling you, this movie ain't playing, man. They're gonna kill characters. They're fine with doing it. It's gonna happen. And then also there's the whole fight with the Hulk, because the Hulk, up until this point, was like the ultimate tank in this universe. Like, you bring the Hulk out and it's over, game over. He's gonna fucking destroy everything, including Loki, who he just beat the living hell out of. The only person who was even kind of able to resist him was Thor, as shown in Thor Ragnarok. So you're thinking, okay, Thor's gonna beat the crap out of, you know, Thanos right at the beginning, and it shows how much that is not going to happen. Thanos beats the shit out of the Hulk, right at the beginning of the movie, which also tells you, like, this guy is on another level. I liked that. The one thing I really did not like about the Hulk bit, though, was that throughout the entire film, the Hulk is unwilling to come out, which was kind of amusing and entertaining for a few scenes, but even they get to that end fight, and Bruce Banner's in, you know, the Hulkbuster Iron Man suit. I liked that to make it different and interesting and stuff. But I still really wanted to see the Hulk actually show up. And even though there's that scene where they're fighting, and Bruce Banner actually says, "Okay, Hulk, this is the time. This is the end game. You have to come out right now," and he still won't do it. I even agree that he shouldn't have come out right there. The moment he should have come out is, if you remember, right before Thanos gets the last Infinity Stone, he throws all these characters into different areas, one of which is Bruce Banner inside the Hulk suit, or inside the Iron Man suit, into a wall. That would have been right after that, you know, Captain America's like holding the arm up of Thanos or whatever. Right then would have been the absolute perfect moment for the Hulk to bust out of not only the wall, but the Hulk Buster suit, and at least somewhat get involved in that fight physically. Or, I mean, I don't know the comics nearly as well as, you know, many other people, but it's my understanding there's other versions of the Hulk. There's Red Hulk, there's Gray Hulk. These are other stronger Hulks. The Green Hulk, I guess, is like the weakest of them all. It would have been interesting if he came out as a different color and essentially accomplished the same thing Thor did, or not maybe the same, but maybe held him back, you know, held him up so that Thor could do that. You know, something like that is really kind of what I wanted to see there, but that didn't happen. Maybe that the Red Hulk or Gray Hulk thing will happen later. I don't know. I mean, this is a movie that I've only seen once, and I could really talk about a lot more, and I need to see it again, and I want to talk about it more. The end credits scene with Samuel L. Jackson and stuff, that's really cool to see him again in that role. Also, there's a lot of people a little confused as to what, and myself included at first, as to what exactly he was doing. Is he like uses this old beeper or whatever? That's a tie-in to Captain Marvel, which will star Brie Larson. So wait for that, but that's some sort of callback to that, because her movie is going to come out. It takes place like 20 years before any of this stuff, so it's probably, we're going to see her movie, and then this is probably going to have some sort of scene that connects to this later. So we got that to look forward to. And there's one other thing I really wanted to talk about with this movie, which all of a sudden is totally escaping me. What was it? Can't remember now. That's unfortunate. I think it had to do with the future. I mean, all right. Okay. So at the end of the film, obviously, you see half of the universe dies. Like, all these people get, you know, phased out and killed off, including a lot of the Avengers themselves. And that's one of those things where you want to believe they would do that, but at the same time, you can't help but know Spider-Man ain't really dead, because he has another movie coming out in like a year. The smart version of you who knows that knows there's no way that character is really dead. So I'm very curious to see like what the restoration is there, or if there's some sort of. I also noticed that a lot of the characters that survive, like Tony Stark and Thor, are a lot of the characters that have been around a long time. So it would not surprise me if whatever happens in the next Avengers Infinity War Part 2 or whatever it is next year, if that somehow reverses the universes or something. Like, because they killed off Black Panther. No way that's staying that way. He's way too popular. Spider-Man already has a guaranteed sequel coming up. You know what I'm saying? Like, those characters are probably coming back, possibly at the expense of your Robert Downey Jr., who is the most expensive actor in the MCU, who constantly is saying he doesn't want to do it anymore. It would not surprise me if somehow he trades lives or something. We'll see what they do exactly. Again, I'm not as familiar with the actual comics, so I don't know for sure how that exactly will play out. But one of the best scenes in that film, in my opinion, was the Tony Stark scene where he's watching Spider-Man die. That scene had a lot of weight to it, like a way more weight to it than I expected out of an Avengers film. Because you basically have this kid who Tony has always been worried about in every movie they've had together, which is granted is just 2. He's just worried about this kid and he doesn't want anything bad to happen to him. And here he is watching this kid die. This kid who's like, panicking for his life. He's watching him die and there's nothing he can do about it, which is in of itself sad. But then there's also the fact that when you watch Age of Ultron, Tony Stark is the only person who saw that shit at the end of the first Avengers. So he has this nightmare in Age of Ultron about like watching all the Avengers die and like him stepping over their corpses. And there he is basically seeing that shit play out. So I like that scene a lot. And I think that it'll be very fascinating to see how they actually play out the second one, knowing full well that there was this scene where Doctor Strange, where they were talking about like he scans like all these possible futures, and there's something like 14.6 million futures. How many do we win? 1. Just 1. And so when there's that line about like, why did you give him the time stone like that? He said it was the end game. Was he referring to the idea that it was just he gave up, or was he referring to the idea that that's just what had to happen? And is that what had to happen because that's the one way out? Like who knows exactly how that's going to play out? But they obviously know what they're doing. They've been calculating this shit for a decade. So yeah, man, I'm super excited to see where it goes. But I think that's enough about that for now. I want to move into the last subject here, which is just kind of a little PS to the same subject we just discussed, which is essentially Ant-Man and the Wasp. There are 2 Avengers, I guess technically 3 if you include Captain Marvel, who are really referenced but not in Avengers Infinity War. Captain Marvel, I guess, Ant-Man, as well as Hawkeye. Now, Hawkeye and Ant-Man are referenced by name when they say this thing about like they need all hands on deck. They even specifically say like, well, where are those 2? And they both say they're under house arrest after the whole Sokovia Accords thing, which was basically a way to not include them in the movie. I'm not entirely sure why you would do that other than budget. I guess with Ant-Man, it kind of made sense because he has a movie. He's got the next movie, so it kind of made sense to keep him out of it. Though I don't know why you would keep Hawkeye out of it other than it's just an extra character who can't really do anything that useful, so there's no real reason to include him. Shit, he shouldn't even have been in Age of Ultron, or not Age of Ultron, Civil War, Captain America Civil War. He had no reason to be in that. He like gave up his whole life to do that, which made no sense. But that's the point, is that's why they're under house arrest and they cut deals. So if you watch the Ant-Man and the Wasp trailer, that's actually like a line right at the beginning of the trailer is how he's like, when Cap needed my help, I said I would do it, and now it's cost me everything, or something like that, where he's basically stuck under house arrest. Now, obviously, he gets out of that and does the whole, whatever the plot of that movie is. So Ant-Man and the Wasp is an interesting situation where it probably has to take place before Infinity War, like right before it. It probably even ends with some sort of scene that connects it to Infinity War in some regard. But it's also going to be kind of a strange follow-up to like possibly the biggest movie ever. To have in just a couple of months have this like, oh yeah, that's still the same universe, but nowhere near as big. I mean, obviously I'm not Kevin Feige, I'm not Disney, I'm not any of that, but I probably would have told him do it the other way around unless there is some story-driven reason for that. If it's simply a financial marketing reason where, some study told them, hey, if we put Avengers out at the very end of April, it'll gross like $1 billion more than it would when we release Ant-Man or whatever. That's unfortunate. That's not as good for storytelling, but at the same time, hey, you know, it's a business. You gotta do what you gotta do. So that said, I am still looking forward to Ant-Man and the Wasp. Obviously nowhere near as much as I was to Infinity War, but I do want to watch it. And that's the success of the Marvel formula, is that you essentially have the world's biggest, most expensive, and longest TV show that really only gets like 1 or 2 episodes a year. And so Avengers Infinity War was the big episode, and Ant-Man and the Wasp has the unfortunate task ahead of it of being the season finale for a year, because we're not getting another one until Captain Marvel, I think, early next year. And then you get the next Avengers Infinity War. So that's why I want to watch it, and that's the genius of it, is they've basically created this universe that you love so much that even the ones that aren't that important to you, like Ant-Man and the Wasp as characters, like the first Ant-Man was okay. It felt like an MCU Phase 1 movie that came out randomly in like Phase 3, but I'll see it because I want to know more about those characters in that universe, and that's why that's smart, and that's why people have been trying to replicate that formula, but no one has been even remotely successful at it because nobody else has really understood why that works. They just take one aspect of it and run, like DC very infamously. Oh, if we just take a bunch of comic book characters and like put them together, then it'll be huge. No, you got to build to it. You can't just make Justice League. It doesn't work that way. And if you're going to build to it, you can't build a universe that everyone hates like you did with Batman v Superman, which was also way too rushed. But I literally, when that movie came out, I did an entire live stream like complaining about it. So it's a whole different thing. But yeah, guys, I think that will kind of do it for me here. I hope you enjoyed this. So as always, thank you very much for listening and watching the channel. Again, if you want to get this early or get other podcasts or other videos, you can go to my Patreon at any time. There will be a link in the description, but it's patreon.com/Adam Koralik. I want to thank you again to all the people who already are on the Patreon. I appreciate that, especially those of you who get shout-outs. That would once again be Justin Webb, Jonas Pachonka, Corey Marsh, Rob Janos, Trey Wagner, and Tim Inman. Thank you guys all for listening, and I will